They said Joseph Valachi was the first man to make the Mafia bleed without firing a single bullet. Not because he was brave, but because he was tired. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories about real men who lived and died by loyalty, and broke it when it mattered most. Brooklyn, 1904. The streets were young, hard, and full of hungry boys with nothing but their fists. Joseph was one of them, small, wiry, always watching. His father worked the docks, came home with whiskey on his breath and disappointment in his eyes. Joe learned early that fear was currency. Respect? That had to be earned. By 17, he was running errands for the neighborhood gang, learning the rhythm of the underworld, when to speak, when to vanish. He wasn't born dangerous. The streets carved it into him. One night, his friend Tony whispered, "Stick with me, Joe, we'll never go hungry again." That was the night he stopped being a kid. The city lights had 1,000 deals, 1,000 betrayals. And somewhere in that smoke, Joseph Valachi began walking toward the family that would one day destroy him. But that loyalty, it came with a price he could never pay. By the 1920s, Joseph Valachi had found his rhythm, quick hands, quiet eyes, and a knack for survival. He wasn't flashy like the others. No tailored suits or diamond cufflinks. Joe was a worker, the kind of soldier every boss needed but few remembered. He started small, driving trucks for the mob, moving tomatoes that weren't really tomatoes, crates full of bootleg liquor. The Prohibition years made millionaires out of men who knew when to keep their mouths shut. Joe did just that. Silent. Reliable. Invisible. In the Bronx, he met a woman named Mildred. Kind eyes. Soft voice. She didn't know what he did for a living, or maybe she did, but loved him anyway. At dinner, she'd say, "Promise me, Joe, no trouble tonight." He'd smile, kiss her hand, and say, "Trouble doesn't knock twice, doll." But under that calm exterior, Joe was building walls. Every favor, every handshake, every job pulled him deeper into the family, the real one, not the one at home. And while others chased glory, Joseph Valachi was quietly building a name that would echo in courtrooms one day. He didn't know it yet, but the same loyalty that fed him would one day starve him. By the early 1930s, the streets of New York pulsed with fear and opportunity. The Castellamarese War had ended, blood still wet on the pavement, and a new order was rising, disciplined, structured, cold. Joe found himself working under the powerful Genovese family, where respect was measured in silence and survival. He wasn't a boss, not even close. But he had something rarer, instincts. He could sense when a deal was about to turn sour, when a man was about to draw a gun, when the air in a room shifted from talk to danger. That sense kept him alive and useful. His reward? A place at the table. Not near the head, but close enough to hear secrets whispered through cigar smoke. He learned the language of power, short sentences, long memories. One night, his capo leaned in and said, "You got good bones, Joe. The family sees you." For a man who'd grown up invisible, that was everything. He bought a better suit, walked taller, smiled less. Every step forward felt like climbing out of poverty, but each rung on that ladder was slick with blood. And higher up, the air was colder and thinner. By the mid-1940s, Joseph Valachi had become what he never thought he'd be, trusted. Not by everyone, but by enough men who mattered. He handled collections, ran protection rackets, and made sure business stayed quiet. In the mob, quiet meant alive. He carried himself with calm precision, not a leader, not a dreamer, but a man who knew his place in the machine. He'd walk into smoky bars where the jukebox never stopped playing Sinatra, nod once, and whole tables went silent. Respect didn't need noise. At home, Mildred noticed the change. He ate slower. Slept less. His laughter was softer, like it came from far away. "You're somewhere else, Joe," she said once. He answered without looking up, "That's the only way to stay here." He started to believe in the family's rules, honor, loyalty, silence, the sacred trinity of survival. He followed them like scripture, even when they burned holes in his conscience. In those years, he didn't fear the police or the rival gangs. He feared only one thing, making the wrong man unhappy. And somewhere deep down, Joseph Valachi began to realize that in this life, trust was just another kind of weapon. The first crack didn't come from a gunshot. It came from a whisper. By the 1950s, the mob was shifting, younger men, colder eyes, hungrier hearts. The new generation didn't care about old codes. They cared about money, speed, and power. Joe, now in his 50s, started noticing how handshakes felt shorter, and eyes lingered longer. One night in a Bronx bar, he overheard two soldiers talking low. Valachi's old school. Too careful. Yeah, the other said, maybe too careful. It was the kind of talk that could bury a man. Inside, Joe felt something tighten, not fear, but that quiet dread only men who've lived too long in the dark understand. The family he'd served for decades was changing its face. Old loyalty was turning into liability. Even his capo, once his friend, had grown distant. Meetings felt colder. Orders came through middlemen. Joe began watching shadows instead of people. He started to wonder, was he being watched, too? That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, staring at the streetlights flickering on wet asphalt, and whispered to himself. I gave him everything, and they still want blood. He was right. And soon, they'd want his. By 1959, the walls began to close in. The feds weren't just chasing shadows anymore, they had names, faces, and files. Joseph Valachi's name was one of them. The government had started cracking open the Mafia's secrets piece by piece, and paranoia spread through the ranks like smoke in a locker room. Joe could feel it everywhere, in the way men spoke softer, in the way cars followed too long, in the way a friendly pat on the back now felt like a test. Then came the arrest. A federal sweep. Conspiracy. Narcotics. Tax evasion. The charges didn't matter, what mattered was that he was inside, and the family was outside, deciding if he was worth keeping alive. In prison, he kept his head down, but rumors traveled faster than guards. They said Valachi was talking. They said he was marked. One afternoon, a fellow inmate slipped beside him in the cafeteria and muttered, "They gave you the kiss, Joe." He didn't ask which they. He already knew. That night, as he lay on his bunk staring at the cracked ceiling, Joe whispered, "If loyalty's a sin, then I've already burned." And by morning, the first attempt on his life would prove it. The first attempt came quiet, a sharpened steel rod, hidden in a man's sleeve. It happened in the prison yard. Joe turned just in time, the blade sliced his arm, not his throat. He lived, but something inside him didn't. That night, under the cold fluorescent lights of solitary, he realized the truth, it wasn't the law that wanted him dead. It was his own family. The same men he protected for 30 years now saw him as a threat. Days turned into weeks. Every footstep in the corridor sounded like a countdown. He stopped eating from the trays they gave him. He didn't trust the water. He slept sitting up, his back to the wall, hands shaking but steady on instinct. Then came the moment that changed American history. FBI agents came to him with a choice, silence or survival. They promised protection, food, a bed without knives under it. Joe stared at the table for a long time, then said quietly, "You want the truth? I'll give you more than that. I'll give you names." With that sentence, Joseph Valachi became something the mob had never seen before. America's first true mafia informant. Once he talked, there was no going back. The FBI called it the Valachi Papers. The mob called it treason. Inside the cold concrete walls of Leavenworth, Joe lived like a ghost. No visitors from the old world. No letters signed with nicknames. Just government men in suits, asking him to repeat stories that still tasted like blood. He told them everything, the structure, the rituals, the names. For the first time, the American public heard words like Cosa Nostra. To the mob, Joseph Valachi wasn't a man anymore, he was a curse. Sometimes, when the cameras were off, he'd sit alone on his bunk, tracing lines on his palm as if reading the story of a life carved by fear. He'd mutter, "They made me. Then they marked me." In 1963, his testimony before Congress became a spectacle: bright lights, microphones, headlines screaming "Mafia exposed." The world listened. But Joe knew the truth: no one escapes the family. Not really. He spent his last years moving between cells and safe houses, protected yet imprisoned, alive but already forgotten. And in that silence, Joseph Valachi learned the hardest truth of all: freedom can feel a lot like punishment. Time moved slower after the spotlight faded. The world outside changed: new bosses, new wars, new faces who never knew his name. But Joseph Valachi still woke every morning before dawn, washed his face in a steel sink, and stared at a man he barely recognized. He was older now, grayer, softer around the eyes. The once sharp enforcer had become a relic of a world that wanted to forget him. Some nights, he'd sit by the window of his guarded room and whisper to himself, "I gave them my life, and they gave me a headline." Reporters called him the rat who broke the Mafia. But in his mind, he wasn't a traitor, he was a survivor. He believed he did what any man would do when the wolves turned on him. When a young journalist once asked, "Do you regret talking?" Joe smiled faintly and said, "You regret breathing when you're drowning?" Even after everything, the fame, the shame, the silence, one thing stayed clear in his mind. He never wanted power. Just peace. But in his world, peace always came with a guard at the door. And somewhere deep inside, Joseph Valachi waited for the day when even his name would vanish. Joseph Valachi died in 1971, alone in a federal prison hospital. No funeral procession, no family crowding the pews, no flowers with his name. Just a number on a file, and a man history couldn't quite decide whether to pity or condemn. He had broken the code, Omertà, the sacred silence. But he had also pulled back the curtain on a secret empire that had ruled America's streets for decades. In doing so, he became both the traitor and the teacher, the sinner who told the truth. If you listen close to his story, you hear two lessons beating against each other. Loyalty without thought can destroy you. But silence, when it hides evil, is no honor at all. In his final days, Joe was said to whisper one line over and over. "I told them what they already knew. I just said it out loud." He outlived the world he built, not because he was lucky, but because he never broke his word to himself. Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more true stories from the dark side of history. Because every secret has an echo. And Joseph Valachi still hasn't faded.